Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen Khan.
And I'm Simon Cooper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappe.
This is the Human Football Podcast.
Last week's episode was part 2 of our double header on Diego Maradona. It's about his downfall. If you haven't already, be sure to check it out. Welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football for today's episode on Paul Pogba, the most gifted footballer of his generation. Not the best, but the most gifted. Pogba was the best player in the World Cup final 2018, the zenith of his career, a career that then went down in flames around the age of 30 and may now about to be revived. Pogba was brought down partly by his nearest and dearest, his older brother Matthias, and a posse of old friends who were demanding money from him with menaces. It was a scandal that featured his brother Matthias's claim that Pogba had paid a West African witch doctor, a marabout, to put a curse on Kylian Mbappe. Obviously, the curse did not work very well.
No, I'm not sure, maybe. Delayed
Delayed effect. And the Pogba story is the story of how hard it is to have a great football career these days if you don't have a solid family. The lowest moment of his career, in 2023, Pogba was given a 4-year ban for doping. He was 30 and it seemed he would never play football again. But we're speaking soon after October when he won his appeal at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. So his doping suspension was cut to just 18 months. Pogba can train again from January 2025 and play from March. So will there be a last act to the snakes and ladders drama that is Paul Pogba's story?
So I think this is the episode that our listeners have requested the most, at least from me. And we have to admit that there's been a selection bias in Heroes and Humans so far because we have picked footballers who are great and often have perfect upbringings. You know, we've spoken about the Judes, the Kylians of this world, Haaland and his amazing genetic heritage. But now we're talking about someone who has a turbulent private life. And I think in telling the life of Pogba, we have to keep asking the question of where did it go wrong? Is there an obvious moment, an inflection point where we can see that his fortunes are about to turn? And finally, as we're recording, there could be a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And I'll reveal my biases. I really, really hope there is.
Yes, because a man of his gifts should play football again. When he returns, he'll only be 31. You know, in Cristiano Ronaldo years, that's like being a baby. He'll be about to turn 32. And so this man could really return to the absolute top.
Some stats about Paul Pogba. He's 31 and he's already played 91 internationals for France. The national team is definitely the arena where we have seen the best of him. Domestically, he's won 4 Serie A titles and 2 Italian Cups with Juventus. At Manchester United, it's been much harder. He does have a Europa League and a League Cup to his name, which actually, looking back, probably not the worst record given the state of Manchester United. He was also re-signed by United for what was then a world record transfer fee of £89 million. He was the world's most expensive footballer.
I suspect United will regret that £89 million with hindsight.
Simon, tell us about where Paul grows up.
I visited it. He grew up in Roissy-en-Brie, which is a suburb of Paris. It's about 20 kilometres east of the city. And so I went there writing about Pogba. And like most of the suburbs of Paris, it's not the violent ghetto that many people imagine when they think of the suburbs. It's a comfortable but a bit soulless, low middle class town, pretty much all new build since the 1970s. And his parents had immigrated from very poor Guinea in Africa. So he grows up with his twin elder brothers, one of whom will become very important in this story, with their mother in a white block of flats with a little 5-a-side football field next to it. You know, I visited there. There's also a little stone terrain multisport with basketball hoops, mini football goals. So it was sport all day at the bottom of the flat. And his dad, a school teacher, lived nearby. And the family's passions are dancing, ping pong, and football.
His parents divorce when he's a teenager. He initially lives with his father and then moves in with his mum. He also grows up in a mixed religious household. So his father's a Christian, his mother is Muslim. Paul grows up basically notionally as a Christian. He goes to church, he reads the Bible, but he discovers Islam through his friends. One day he says they go to pray and I just went with them because, I was hanging out. He says that he felt something when he prayed with them and he very quickly converts to Islam.
This is actually quite common in the suburbs of Paris, that because you have notional Christians and Muslims living side by side, people will marry and also convert to each other's religions a lot.
And quite common among French footballers. I'm thinking of William Saliba, I think. Henri Ribéry also converted to Islam.
Yes.
Nicolas Anelka. Paul Pogba is devout as an adult. He has done the pilgrimage multiple times. He fasts during Ramadan, even when it's football season. And you can see him sort of lifting his hands up in prayer before matches start. So he's a public Muslim. And this is also something that we're going to be talking about later on when this very complicated relationship with his brother Matthias comes into the fore, because he is accused, as we've already mentioned, of the dark arts.
I should say that as well as visiting his hometown, I also interviewed him around that time at Juventus. He was still at Juventus then.
This is before he went to United.
Yeah.
What was he like to interview? Because I think he's someone who, maybe the opposite of your Griezmann experience, probably gave you quite a lot of material.
Yeah, he really wanted to talk. And I was struck by how intelligent and frank and forthcoming he was. He really likes to express himself in words.
Speaks 4 languages?
Yes, we'll come to that. And as we see with the French team, where he's a leader in word, he's a kind of Churchill of the French team. He's very striking in appearance because he's massive. You know, the French say he has the build of a removals man in the French football cliche. And he dressed like a boy who was about to go nightclubbing. You know, we met around lunchtime, but he earrings in each ear, a picture of what seemed to be a goat on his T-shirt. I wonder if the goat was a symbol. And massive smile. And he had these very complicated designs in his hair. His hair is always different. It's not like Bellingham, who has the belly cut, where he pretty much always looks the same. And I said, you know, what do your hairstyles represent? And he said, me. And I think this is very important in Pogba, that he's on a journey of self-expression. He likes to express himself on the field. And so the interview, you know, a lot of footballer interviews are kind of useless. They just say boring stuff. But everything he said was interesting. And it was this beautiful spring day at Juventus' training centre just outside Turin. And he was trying to decide essentially whether to join Manchester United, Real Madrid or Barcelona. This was a guy very much at the peak of his rise. And so it was beautiful to see.
Just for the listeners, the fact that you're saying he's interesting is about as big as a compliment as it can get, because you think everyone's a moron.
I think there are many morons. I don't think everyone is a moron.
99% of the world. But that is high praise coming from you.
He's not a moron. He grew up kicking around with his older brothers, and he told me they played normally hard. So he's playing against these 2 guys who are always bigger than him. And he was actually quite a little kid early on. The massive growth happens later. So he gets to be better than his brothers. And you can see that this is going to be a source of tension, a source of jealousy. His dad wanted them all to be pros. His dad had come to France in the 60s and he said, dreamt of being a pro footballer. But he said, in my time, you had to choose between studies and sport. So he decided to push his children so that his boys could succeed where they failed. So the 3 boys are being raised to be pros. And the dad pumps up the footballs they play with to be rock hard, because he thinks if you can shoot with a rock hard ball, then on the field, when you have a light ball, it's going to be easy.
That's got to hurt.
It was probably a lot of pain. I mean, I'm also imagine every day kicking around with your 2 massive older brothers, because they're massive as well. But it does help turn Pogba into a great. And what we're seeing here is a kind of extreme version of what you see all over Greater Paris. These immigrant dads whose own lives have become disappointing. They never got the chances. The doors never opened for them, especially not for black men. And then often they end up pouring their dreams and ambitions into their son, who's going to be a great footballer. Weirdly, with one of the 3 Pogbas, it really works.
But I am struck by the fact that when I've heard Pogba speak about why he's a footballer, he actually says it was his mum. So he says his mum played football. She played street football in Guinea. And she wore the number 10. And I think him emphasising his mother as a footballer who loved the game is a way to show that he is also somehow a pathbreaker. Like, he comes from a family of people who have not been scared to break rules and conventions.
So at this point in his childhood, it seems to be a supportive family that is helping him towards his dream of becoming a footballer. The thing about growing up as a good footballer in Paris is there are also very serious clubs sort of on every corner. And I walked from their flat to the local football club, US Roissy, where they played. And I spoke to the former youth coach who'd become the club president, a guy called Sambou Tati. I said, you know, did little Paul want to be a pro? And Tati said, every boy here wants to be a pro. They all think they're going to be a pro. And he said the problem with Paul is that he would dribble. So Tati would chastise him for dribbling and Pogba would go, wah, you know. So he was a very gifted kid who thought, like the junior Messi, I don't need to pass. I can do this all by myself. They're very proud of the 3 Pogba brothers who all become pros at the little club. And so Tati showed me inside their little storeroom, which is called the Bureau Football. And there are 3 shirts signed by the 3 Pogba brothers. This is before the family falls apart in the scandal we're going to come to. And each had written the same inscription on the shirt: for my first dream club. At 13, he's scouted by the Youth Academy of Le Havre, which is a port 100 odd miles away from Paris. So he leaves to go there. And then at 16, the big time, Man United spot him. He goes to Man United as a teenager, and pretty soon he's training with Paul Scholes and Ryan Giggs, late career. Pogba was really impressed with Scholes. He told me, with them you train to perfection, because Scholes, although he was about 40 at this time, is still there at the end of practice, hitting long balls, hitting shots, hitting everyone correct.
Can you imagine how scary Paul Scholes must be to a 17, 18-year-old on the training field? Mainly because Paul Scholes is just like, he doesn't talk, like, he just looks like, you're out there, Paul. I'd be fucking frightened. I mean, it's quite a harrowing experience for him. He talks about, jumping on a flight on his own, listening to rap music to hype himself up for the fact that he's going to live in a country, in a city where he doesn't speak the language. United put him up with a local family, so a local Mancunian family, to help sort of his integration into life in the Northwest. He says that they're very good people, but it's difficult for him. He says, no one really reached out to help me. But that helped me grow. I was alone. I didn't have my parents, but I was dreaming of being a professional. I had to prove myself and earn respect in the dressing room. And one of the figures that he does bond with very quickly is I think one of the only French speakers and another sort of young prospect, who's Adnan Januzaj, Belgian.
And Adnan has to translate Ferguson for him.
Yes, so Adnan's main job is actually to be the interlocutor, because he can sort of understand Fergusonian Scottish.
So Ferguson is this kind of missed opportunity in the Pogba story, because he doesn't really think Pogba's ready, or he doesn't rate him. And in December 2011, Pogba thinks, right, that's it, because there's a vacancy in midfield, and Ferguson puts the Brazilian defender Rafael there against Blackburn. And Pogba's like, what am I, chopped liver? At that point, he feels he's done. So Pogba's 18, 19. It's 2012. He feels he's ready to play first team football, and he's not getting a chance at Man United. And he talks to his agent, Mino Raiola, the famous super agent who becomes his mate. And Raiola says, yes, you're underpaid at United. You should be in the team. But look, he says, United have a fantastic manager. Maybe you should stay. But Raiola does go and ask United for a better contract. And beautifully, Raiola, who died a couple of years ago, very sadly, told me the story of his negotiations with Ferguson. They're very combative, Raiola and Ferguson both. Pogba is summoned, and Ferguson tries to bully him. And Ferguson says to Pogba, not to Raiola, you don't want to sign this contract? Like, I'm going to beat the hell out of you and give you a hairdryer treatment. And Pogba says, we're not going to sign this contract under these conditions. And then this is all Raiola's version of the conversation. Ferguson turns to Raiola and says, you're a twat. And Raiola is confused because he doesn't know the word.
He thinks maybe it means very powerful, handsome, well-dressed.
No, I think he's interested as a linguist, because he was raised bilingual, Dutch, Italian, speaks good English and Spanish, and he's thinking, what is this word? And he actually asked me, do you know what it is? And I said, yes, I grew up in England. I spent a lot of time in England. I'm familiar with it. And Raiola said, well, I just didn't know what it was, so I didn't really know how to respond.
So up until that point, this is what, 12 years after this conversation's happened?
We're now speaking 12 years later, yeah.
It was only when he met you that he bothered to ask what...
No, he found out subsequently.
Right, okay.
But he was curious to know whether I knew. He was like, does everybody in the Anglo world know what a twat is, or is it just... And Raiola decides, I'm not going to engage with the twat thing, because who knows what it means. And Raiola says, I have 2 chihuahuas, and this is an offer that they would not sign.
Because my chihuahuas wouldn't walk onto the grass for that money. That's what he says.
And so Ferguson says, well, what do you think he needs to earn? And Raiola says, not that. And then Ferguson says again, you're a twat, which I think is the point at which Raiola thinks, when the conversation ends, I really need to look this up or ask somebody.
We're not getting anywhere here. He keeps using the same word.
So Raiola and Ferguson do not hit it off. Ferguson also publicly attacks Pogba in a press conference, as he shows no respect for the club.
And Pogba speaks about it afterwards, and he recounts it as absolutely incredible to watch. The fact that someone was speaking to Ferguson like that.
Raiola is very unimpressed by Ferguson. He doesn't care at all. And his issue now is, which top European club should Pogba go to? Because Raiola's philosophy is, you don't wait for the club to make an offer. You decide which club the player's going to go to, and then you tell the club. Pogba feels he's ready for the absolute top. He has no limits. And Juventus say, we want him at any cost. This is the best player we have seen in the world. But Raiola's a bit sceptical because Juve are not a club that give youngsters a lot of patience. You don't get slowly blooded there. It's not Ajax. And Raiola says to Pogba, look, Juve might not be a good step for you. But Pogba says, no, we are going to Juve. Raiola negotiated a salary that marked Pogba out as a valued first-team player because the salary you come in with a club is very important and you're placed in the hierarchy and the manager is expected to give you a game if you have a first-team salary. But afterwards, he says to Pogba, look, why are we doing this? Why do you want to go to Juve, which is not a club for young players? Pogba says, because in my life, I've always chosen the hardest path, and this was the hardest path, just like going to United at 16 is the hardest path, because he's a guy who feels I can do anything and I'm going to test myself. And he goes there for just £800,000 to Juventus in 2012. So it's nothing. Ferguson is very miffed and says, I don't think he showed us any respect at all, to be honest. I'm quite happy that if they carry on that way, they're probably better doing it away from us. So Pogba's been a bad boy. He's run away from his daddy.
This is all very telling, given that we know that he's going to be back at Old Trafford very soon.
Pogba is immediately impressed by Juve. He says in his first training session there, he lost 3 kilograms. He says the physical training in Italy is so intense and targeted. And he says in England it's very explosive, it doesn't stop, but you also don't have the same kind of tactical sophistication. In Italy, you could have a 3-hour training session talking about, the next opponent's midfield formation. He goes from playing with Scholes to age 19, playing in the first team with Andrea Pirlo at Juve. Pogba is a guy who thinks, I have every gift, but I'm also going to be learning every day. And what does he learn from Pirlo? He told me his calmness, his confidence. Pirlo would miss a pass and it didn't matter. He was sure he would succeed with the next one. Pirlo was in his salon. He was in his lounge. He was always at ease on the field, always relaxed. And Pirlo could decide matches. And Pogba thinks, I'm going to be a player who decides matches. I'm not going to be a supportive player. I'm a main man player. He looks at Pirlo and Scholes and he thinks, yeah, you can read the game. I need to learn that. That's good. I can do that. But he thinks I can also do things that Pirlo and Scholes can't do because he's a truck. And he says, I'm fairly big. I like to use my body. So even when there's a player on me, I'll control the ball. I don't have to get rid of it immediately because I can hold off the opponents. Whereas Pirlo and Scholes are guys who need to move the ball forward quick because they're smaller.
Pogba does really well at Juve, personally, and the team is also performing really well in this period.
Yeah, they're hyper-dominant. It turns out it's not really the hardest path because he's immediately in the first team. They win 4 league titles in 4 years. He wins the Under-20 World Cup with France in 2013.
Where he's also the captain of the team.
And he's voted best player of that World Cup, even though his teammate is the legendary future Arsenal striker Yaya Sanogo.
A cult icon.
Cult hero. Pogba is better than Sanogo. Goes to the World Cup, the real World Cup, 2014. He's voted best young player of the World Cup. Everyone can see this guy is brilliant, but he always stays close to his roots. So whenever he's back in Paris with the national team, he'll visit his family and his old mates in Roissy-en-Brie, and then they'll always have a kick around. And, his brothers are very close. They're turning into journeyman pro footballers at minor clubs. But, you think this is a successful, happy family.
It actually will come back to bite him later on.
Yeah, he has a massive entourage of guys from Roissy-en-Brie who he grew up with. The hangers-on who have not had opportunities or success in life. And they see Pogba as their one route to riches. So when I interviewed him in May 2016, he was 23. He was the most sought-after player on earth. And he has to choose between Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Manchester United. He's already the complete footballer. He has everything. He's this giant who has the touch of Maradona. And I said to him, what kind of footballer do you want to be? Because he sort of has a problem that people who can do anything have, which is how do you choose? What aspects of yourself do you decide to enhance? And he says, I'm going to be everything. He says, I'm going to be the new midfielder, all players rolled into one, from defensive midfielder to attacking midfielder to attacker. I'm going to defend, give assists, win back the ball, score, be a leader on the field. And he says, I'd like to get to the level where I have everything. Patrick Vieira, Deschamps, Zidane, Ronaldinho, Thierry Henry, Ronaldo. It wouldn't be bad, that. So he's talking to me at 23 about being a combo of most of the best players of our time.
Did you put your hand on his shoulder and said, Paul, no, you have to pick?
I was just sort of flabbergasted because footballers aren't supposed to stick out their necks like that, big themselves up. You're not supposed to say at 23, I want to be a combination of Zidane, Ronaldinho and Ronaldo. It just sounds, even if you're brilliant, odd. So I thought maybe he's joking. And I said, so you want to be a box-to-box midfielder with a bit of Zidane added, right? I thought, well, nobody can be that. And he just laughed and he said, yeah, and Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Messi, everyone, Iniesta. And I said, listen, hang on, are you being serious? And he said, I'm totally serious. I've already scored goals, given assists, won back balls. I can do all that. And it's really just about raising the level. And I said, well, that's also interesting. You know, you're the most sought after footballer in the world at the moment, but you think you're only playing at about 60% of what you can do. He said, I don't think I'm great. I've done nothing. This is 2016. He's won 4 league titles with Juve. He says, I've done nothing in football. I've won leagues, but I haven't won the Champions League, the World Cup, the Euro. And he says, look, in 30 years' time, this is what he's telling me. And I'm just sitting there thinking, this is the most remarkable player interview I've ever had. He said, in 30 years' time, I want people to be watching me on YouTube like people now watch Maradona and Pelé on YouTube. He says, look, people are going to think this is pretentious, that I'm, saying I want to be this legend. But he says, for me, it's a challenge. It's my desire. It's my dream. He says, I'm not saying I'm going to get there, but this is my goal. But I thought, wow, this is pretty, it's a big goal, right? I mean, nobody would even say I can be Zidane, let alone I can be Zidane plus Ronaldo. I don't know what you make of that, but my sense is that in football, even in national teams typically, you have to fit into a hole. Every peg has a hole. That's how the tactics of modern football are construed. And Pogba is saying, no, I don't want to be in a hole. I want to be the whole orchestra. And this is going to be one of the issues that will bring him down.
So Paul Pogba has realised his dream to become a professional footballer. That period at Manchester United is just a blip. And at Juventus, he's shown that he is probably the most promising young talent in the world. Every club in the world wants him. So far, we haven't seen the darker sides of his family upbringing and also his broader kind of societal friendship groups in his hometown, where he keeps returning to, even though now he's probably one of the most famous players in the world. So join us after the break when we talk about Pogba's failed return to United, his eventual winning of a World Cup, and then the unravelling of his professional and private life.
In a horrible way. Join us after the break.
This holiday season, Lululemon makes it easy to give a gift that goes beyond the moment they open it. There's the sound of them unboxing super soft Lululemon loungewear. And then there's the sound of them slipping into deep recovery mode after every workout. With Lululemon, the real gift happens when they're living in it. Open the moment. Shop now at Lululemon.com.
This is a reminder that you're listening to Heroes and Humans of Football with me, Simon Cooper.
And me, Mehreen Khan.
Welcome back to Heroes and Humans, where we join Paul Pogba as he has to choose which of the world's great clubs to join in 2016. The contenders are Barcelona, Real Madrid, and Manchester United. But his agent, Mino Raiola, says you have to go to the club that needs you. And Barcelona doesn't need Pogba. Raiola says their 3 trophies are Messi, Neymar, Suarez at this point. Real Madrid had just won the Champions League. They didn't really need a Pogba either. It was just kind of adding him as a trophy player, Raiola says. Why go back to Manchester United as a superstar to the club where he'd been a rejected reserve? And Raiola said this club needed him. United in 2016, it's the post-Ferguson mess. I mean, also Raiola might have added, he didn't tell me that, but media reports said the clubs jointly paid Raiola 20 million euros, which would have been a nice incentive to bring him to United. But I think it's also true that they felt Pogba has a place as the new king of Manchester United, and Raiola also brings his other big client, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, to United at that point. And Raiola said, we were walking around his hometown, Haarlem in the Netherlands, had a lovely afternoon with Mino, it was one of the most interesting people I've ever met in football, like Pogba is, but Raiola even more so. And Raiola says, look, you just see the moves to United. What you see, though, is the result of years of sculpting. He said, I spent 2 years working on Manchester United's deal with Pogba because Raiola saw clubs as these kind of idiot institutions. They don't know what they need. They don't know what's good for them. So you as an agent have to go to them and say, do you know what? You need Paul Pogba.
And again, it's Paul Pogba choosing the harder path, because United at this point still don't know what their post-Fergie identity looks like. But, I have to say this because we see it so often, it is also a decision motivated by some emotion of going back to prove the people who doubted you wrong. The other thing that springs to my mind is I think of Lukaku. Comes back to Chelsea to prove that he was going to be the guy that they thought he was the first time.
Didn't work.
Returns almost never work well in football.
So he's at United. People can't quite yet see that it's going to go wrong. But then comes, very far from United in Russia, the best month of Pogba's career, where he wins the World Cup 2018. Now, the French team had not been popular with fans for years before. The misbehaviour, the racism of many supporters against a mostly non-white team. And Pogba was not popular. French fans had always criticised his nonchalance. There'd been views that he should be dropped in the years before. And then he goes to Russia and he does what Pogba has almost never done in his career, that he sacrifices himself, he limits himself as a player. And he's willing to be a peg in a hole in the team that Didier Deschamps, the manager, has designed. He's asked during the tournament, you're doing a lot more defensive running than you usually do. And he says, yeah, I want to win this World Cup, so I'm making sacrifices. And he says, look, I'm not N'Golo Kante, I'm not committed defender, but now I'm doing it with pleasure. Everyone loves him that month. It's the only month of his career, I think, that people see what a fantastic, impressive guy he is, as well as a great footballer. So I remember this press conference. He'd been answering questions at press conferences in English, Italian, French, normal, trilingual. And at one point, this Peruvian journalist asked a question in Spanish. There's anxiety. There is no Spanish interpreter to hand. And Pogba says, no, I got this. And he answers the question in fluent colloquial Spanish.
His wife is Bolivian. They meet in Miami. So he flexes a bit of Spanish on her and the deal is done.
Very good. During this World Cup, Pogba is not just the leader on the field, he's the leader off it. So there's this great tradition now in France that at the end of every World Cup, there's a documentary on TF1, the main French channel, immediately afterwards, about the French team from inside the changing rooms. So you see all the stuff that happened inside the changing rooms. It's done with the team consent. Before every game, they put their arms around each other in the changing room and Pogba gives a speech. And in the early matches, he's really geeing them up. Lads, we're going to do this.
He's 25. There's Hugo Lloris, Giroud, far more senior leaders on the pitch.
He's not the captain.
He's not the captain. And he towers over them because he's huge. And he delivers this masterful... it's kind of spine-tingling.
Yeah, he has the gift of the gab. And then they get to the final against Croatia and he changes mode just like Churchill could. And he knows it's a World Cup final. He's not going to get them up. He's just going to speak to them, essentially saying, this is the moment. This is the decisive moment. And he says, guys, we all know where we are. We are 90 minutes away from perhaps making history. 90 minutes. You should listen to this with, imaginary Vera Lynn playing in the background and Spitfires flying over the white cliffs. And he says, we have played, I don't know how many matches in our lives, but this is a match that changes everything. It changes the whole story. There are two teams. There is a cup. I want this evening to be in the memory of all the French people who are watching us. This is Churchill.
This is Macron, no? Like on a random Wednesday.
It's Churchill.
It's in a long tradition of French...
It's De Gaulle giving his 18th of June speech in 1940. Okay. I want this evening, says Pogba, to be in the memory of all the French people who are watching us, their children, their grandchildren, and their grandchildren again. This is his pre-match speech. Today, there are 90 minutes to return to the story for life. For life, guys! Now, I'm looking at you. I'm not going to shout. I want us to go on the field, leaders, warriors. And then I want to see tears, not tears of sadness, tears of joy, hugging each other on the field. How can you go? They must have wept for 15 minutes before they could go out. Amazing. The best comment on Pogba's speech is by reserve centre-back Adil Rami, who says, I don't know how, and I don't know from where, but Paul Pogba became a leader.
He is born.
In that final against Croatia, we get the ultimate Pogba moment on a football field. I think he's just won the ball. He looks up. He gives a first touch outside of the foot pass over 50 yards to Mbappe, who's sprinting onto it. And then that wasn't enough because an attack develops. The ball is delivered to Pogba by Griezmann, who juggles it a couple of times in the penalty area and then gives it to Pogba. And of course, Pogba bashes it in. So that attack starts with a 50-yard outside the boot pass and then you finish off in the World Cup final. It just doesn't get better. You looked at him and you thought he's playing with ease and joy in the World Cup final. And later he said, I felt more pressure going to play with Roissy-en-Brie when he was, 12 years old against the next suburb because they would bring out their whole neighbourhood to insult us. And if we won, they'd try and beat us up. And he said that was much more pressure than a World Cup final. So he's playing against Croatia and he's thinking, well, nobody's going to come in and beat us up. This is easy. To return to the issue of his family, on the field after the match in the Luzhniki Stadium in Moscow, he celebrates with his mum and his twin brothers, who have become international also, but playing for Guinea, the parents' homeland. It's a very poignant scene with hindsight because it looks so happy. The three brothers, the mum, and then he sticks a photo of his dead father on the World Cup trophy.
It's his shin pad, isn't it? Isn't his dad on the shin pad?
I guess, yeah. You're better on these visual Instagram moments than I am. And Pogba also thinks, well, I've been the best player in a mostly non-white team that's won a World Cup. The French are going to have to accept us, right? And I'm listening to French radio in my hotel room, writing after the final. And there's Pogba saying, now there is no colour, black, yellow, everything. We are all united. Now you are all proud of us forever, which turned out not to be entirely true. Of course, Macron is hanging around all over this World Cup win. But when Pogba sees Macron that day and the next couple of days, Macron's always there, Pogba thinks, we can do a dab. So you remember the dab was...
It was the kind of... it was a kind of the dance move of the day, the gritty of the day.
Yeah, it became definitively uncool when Paul Ryan, who was the definitively uncool US Republican vice presidential candidate, also did the dab.
Yeah, it was a moment in time.
But Pogba sticks with the dab for a long time. And he goes up to Macron and he says something like, un petit dab, monsieur le président. So there are various photos of those days of Macron and Pogba dabbing. He thinks it's hilarious that the president is there and he wants to milk this to the max.
What I remember is just the unadulterated joy of that team and how they expressed it on and off the pitch. This is partly, the whole cultural moment that they became, the fact that they were sung about in rap songs and the way that they portrayed themselves and going to the Elysee and dabbing. It was just different. I guess people outside France have this kind of stuck-up image of what the French are like.
Not totally wrong.
It's perhaps not. And these guys just undercut all of that with their humanness.
Yeah.
And then subsequently, obviously, we'll talk about it, but I'm always struck by how much Pogba loves his French national team boys, how much that is his home. That's always where he wants to be his best. And we've spoken in different ways about the complicated relationships that the French fans have with the French team. But for Pogba, it's not complicated at all. So 25, he's won a World Cup and he thinks he's going to win another World Cup and maybe another World Cup and definitely a Euros. This is just the beginning of a period of domination for what is clearly the best team in the world at that point. But that World Cup will be the high watermark of his professional life and maybe his life full stop, because from that point onwards, everything seems to spiral out of control.
Yeah, we're going to get to the waste of his United years in a moment. But first, let's talk about France screwing up Euro 2020. Because here we get a foreshadowing of the family drama. It's not just that Pogba has a negative starring role, but his whole family does. So it's the France-Switzerland game, round of 16 in Bucharest.
They kind of get through the group stages. It's quite tough group stages, but they kind of eke through it. Hungary, Portugal.
Yeah.
It's not the best, but
they're the best team in Europe.
They're still going to win it.
They're going to win it, and they're just warming up. And Switzerland, obviously, they're going to beat Switzerland.
So they go 1-0 down. We're like, okay, it's not ideal. But then they go 3-1 up. And the goal to get them 3-1 up is Paul Pogba in the middle of his half, about 35 yards out from goal, eyes the top right corner, and he smacks it in top bins. It's probably one of the best goals of that tournament, which gets forgotten because of what happens afterwards. But we see the brilliance of Paul Pogba.
This is a guy who can do everything.
It's 3-1. It's over. Nobody remembers that Switzerland went up. But then
Switzerland make it 3-2. It's the 90th minute. You're 3-2 out. Obviously, you play it safe.
You just hang in, see the whistle out, get through to the semi-finals.
You're not going to lose the ball stupidly. Pogba loses the ball stupidly. As he loses it, his teammate Adrien Rabiot raises his arms in the classic French display of discontent and anger. Then Switzerland score from this possession, and Rabiot does his nut, and he and Pogba start to row. So Didier Deschamps has to intervene and calm down Pogba. So Rabiot is blaming Pogba, understandably, for having let the Swiss equalise.
And the game is still going on. Extra time, penalties, whatever. So this happens just after that moment.
This is in the 90th minute, yeah.
So what he does is he just lingers on the ball, takes an extra touch. There's 3 men around him. They're ready to press. When you look back at the goal, it's a very stupid moment, but there's also a massive gap between the two central defenders, which Switzerland then take advantage of and score. So it is a litany of errors from the team. But the Rabiot-Pogba moment becomes the moment that everyone remembers from that game.
Yeah, it goes to penalties. Mbappe misses, for which he gets a lot of racial abuse.
What Pogba volunteers, he's 4th on the list, and he says no, because he's just had this fight with Rabiot. He knows people are watching him. Deschamps puts out the list for the penalties. Pogba's 3rd or 4th. He says, no, I want to take the first one. He was like, give me the first one. I want to go first. Because he knows that this could be a moment where people talk negatively about Paul Pogba because of what happened with the equaliser. Walks up, smacks the penalty in. We'll talk about his mother, who's not even in the stadium at this point. She's left because she's too nervous to watch. But that kind of shows how he's always the guy who thinks, well, I'm not going to be the reason that we fail. And if we do win, I want to be the person that's going to help us drag us out of it.
It's also what he said to Raiola, I always choose the hardest path. The easiest would be let someone else take that pen.
Yeah, I'm not first on the list. I just go with the order, but he says, no, give me the ball, and he goes first.
And scores. But Kylian Mbappe misses. Switzerland win on penalties. This brilliant French team is knocked out. But meanwhile, it's all kicking off in the stands, in the bits of the stands where the families of the players are sitting. And security had already asked some of Pogba's friends to calm down because they'd been having a go at Rabiot during the match. So one suspects there was pre-existing tension between the Rabiot and Pogba families. But then there is a scuffle in the stands between Adrien Rabiot's mother, who is also his agent and kind of the hyper-dominant figure in his life.
Indeed.
So the mother, Véronique Rabiot, scuffles with relatives of Pogba. And Rabiot's mother is saying, you know, your idiot son lost the ball, which is why we're here. Rabiot's mother then also makes the mistake of turning to Kylian Mbappe's father and saying, you should put your son in his place and make him less arrogant. And she says all the journalists are always blowing smoke up Kylian and it's nonsense. And so Rabiot's mother is not making many friends in the stands at this point.
Basically the world's worst Karen. She's the Karen of football, right? She looks like the Karen. She behaves like the Karen. She picks on the black boy's parents. She's fully Karen.
Okay, well, I will leave those racial slurs to you. I'm going to stick strictly to the facts.
Karen would do, leave the racial slurs to herself.
There was a heated exchange between Rabiot's mum and Kylian Mbappe's mum and dad. And for about 20 minutes, according to RMC Sport, Véronique Rabiot is clashing with several other families in Bucharest.
And it's all captured on the cameras because there's just cameras that zoom into the stands. And you can see this happening. We don't know what's being said, but it's clear that something's going on.
Now, things are also going disappointingly at United. He's been at United from 2016 and it never really works because, you know, he wants to express himself. He wants to be an artist. He's not so interested in the high efficiency that he managed at the World Cup. He wants to be a player that people are going to watch on YouTube in 30 years' time. And in this dysfunctional United team, they can never quite find the right role. He's not a brilliant concentrator. So is he more gifted than Cristiano Ronaldo? Quite possibly. But with Ronaldo, you feel he manages 90 minutes of total concentration a match. Pogba doesn't.
And is that because he's so good that he's complacent?
Yeah, I think he feels, you know, I can lose the ball, I'll just stick out a leg and get it back. They'll score, no matter, I can sort this out. If you have the full repertoire, which almost no other player does, inevitably you tend to complacency. You've also already won a World Cup by 2018. You think, I can sort it out.
So at United, I think this kind of doing everything really comes to bite him and he speaks about it. So when it's all going very wrong, he's being attacked by people like idiots like Graham Souness who really hold him up as the problem. And he comes out in interviews and he says, look, I'm playing the role that Kanté plays at Chelsea. And Kanté never scores any goals. He never gives any assists. Do we criticise N'Golo Kanté for being a bad player because he never scores goals and he never assists? So he's not doing the attacking part of the game. He's frustrated because he's not being played there. But then he uses his own sort of I want to be everything and realises now this is his downfall because in England people don't understand what he's trying to do. They don't understand why he can't score the goals that he's supposed to be scoring and why he's also just not as good as the defensive midfielder that he's supposed to be. So he's basically become subpar at all of the elements of his game that he wants to be great at.
Well, at times he's defensive midfielder, but at times over the 6 years at United he plays in other positions and they never really find a role for him. You know, he says at one point, at United, do I really have a role? I ask the question and I don't have the answer. So he feels, I mean, that also if you can do everything, then they think, oh, well, we need you at number 10 now, we need you at number 6. you get abused. And in his last season at United, he says, I have to be honest, this doesn't satisfy me at all, these last 5 seasons. Really not at all. I mean, these are the peak years of the career of the most gifted player of his generation. And all he's won there are the Europa League and the League Cup, both in his first season back there in 2017. So it's been a waste. He finds that gutting. And then, he has this other personal tragedy in April 22, which is that Mino Raiola dies, his agent, but also close friend and advisor. Mino's only 54 and Pogba is very cut up. So it's been a disappointing 6 years. Summer 2022, his contract at United expires, and aged only 29, he leaves for free back to Juventus. But what nobody realizes at that point is that his private life has already become a terrifying hell. His family is imploding, and his career is about to as well.
This is a story of the betrayal by his brother, of extortion, and of apparent black magic. It all unfolds in 2022, but let's start with the key figure in this dramatic story, which is Matthias, his older brother, who we've already mentioned numerous times. He's in the stands when they're playing against Switzerland. He's part of the posse. But who is he, Simon? And why does he turn on his younger brother, Paul?
By 2022, Matthias Pogba's career as a journeyman footballer is petering out. He and Florentin, who's Matthias's twin, are professional footballers, but without little Paul's gifts. And so Matthias has played for clubs like Wrexham, Crewe Alexandra. He's played in Italy, Partick Thistle in Scotland. He played in Spain for Manchego, which is better known for cheese than for football. And he played a bit for Guinea. So it's 2022, like many journeyman footballers, he's thinking, what am I going to do? Nobody wants me anymore. How am I going to fill the rest of my life? And he has a brother who is a multi-millionaire. That proximity starts to cause a problem. And this comes out later. It turns out that in March 2022, the brother Matthias and friends from their old suburb bring Paul Pogba from a charity evening.
They're in the Shangri-La Hotel in Paris, hanging out.
And it's for their charity association Golden Score, which aims to help top athletes retrain, which for Matthias and Florentin will be an issue because they will need to find careers. Everyone's having a good time. The 3 Pogba brothers appear publicly together in a photo call. Their mother's delighted. And at some point in the evening, old friends from the neighborhood say, Paul, we'd like to have a word. And then he's taken to an apartment somewhere in the region by his childhood friends. Pogba later tells the police, 2 hooded individuals armed with an M16 and an assault rifle emerge from a slum in the apartment. And his brother appears to be involved in this gang. And the gang says, we've been protecting you for years. You didn't know that, but we've been your secret protection team. And you owe us 13 million euros because we've been protecting you for 13 years. And Pogba says, no, I'm not going to pay you 13 million euros. And they say, okay, we're going to assign this guy, Babacar, who's just going to be by your side all the time, and he's going to be demanding money from you. The day after this night, very traumatic, Pogba reports to the French team. Nobody knows this has happened. The TV camera's there. Nobody knows. Pogba is all smiling. He's wearing a great outfit. He's with Aurélien Tchouameni, the new French player, is his mate. And Pogba says, isn't it nice we're having such lovely weather? And he just seems in great spirits. As you say, I suppose being with Les Bleus is coming home for him. But he's had this massively traumatic experience. Matthias wasn't present that night when he's threatened with guns. And he didn't know that night that Paul had been kidnapped. But then the gang enroll Matthias to put pressure on Paul and say, you owe us 13 million euros, you owe us 13 million euros. Pogba never gives them 13 million euros, but it appears that over time, he gave 5 of them nearly 250,000 euros. So he's trying to pay them off in a smaller way.
He's just getting the amount of money he can get out from the ATMs and appeasing them with that.
3 of them are childhood friends. 2 are former acquaintances from his old suburb. And they are now going to be tried for extortion, kidnapping, and criminal association. And one of the guys who is being tried is the brother, Matthias Pogba.
This is not the only time that he gets, threatened directly. It happens again a few months later.
Yeah, summer 2022. He's just returned from United to Juve. So he's only been at Juve for 6 days. He's in pre-season training. By this point, the French authorities are tracking this gang which is threatening him and are tracing their phones so we know exactly what happened. So these 5 guys are in a car, they drive from France into Italy, and they actually drive in a Mercedes that belongs to Pogba. These guys are totally reliant on Pogba for all their income. They arrive at the Juve training centre. Matthias Pogba is there also in an Audi. The Juventus reception says, oh, well, you need to register. And they say, we're not going to register. We just want to meet Paul Pogba, and then we'll fill out a registration form. So the security guards at Juve are suspicious, and they're watching all this. Pogba is told there's some guys who want to meet you, and Pogba says, I'm definitely not going to meet them. So Matthias Pogba texts Paul and says, fool, crazy person, I'm waiting here for you. And Pogba responds with a question mark. It says, I can't come and meet you. The brother says, the whole family is in danger. We're waiting for you. You have to come and see us to save the family. Pogba is not stupid enough to go out. He gets a message from their friend Rouge, and Rouge writes, voila, 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 you know exactly what you did. Voila, I'm not going to move from here. You've put everyone in trouble for what you did. So they come to Juve to threaten Pogba. He turns them away. Now 6 of these guys are heading for trial for extortion, kidnapping, and criminal association, and they risk several years in prison for what they've done to Pogba.
So these guys have jumped in an Audi owned by Paul Pogba, driven to Turin to confront him at his new club when he's basically the centre of the footballing world because he's just returned back to Juventus. And they decide this is the moment that they want to ambush him again, after having already done so in France a few months earlier, and remind him that they're going to be following him wherever he goes. It's incredibly chastening to think about.
I mean, the poor guy, imagine going through that. Imagine that is your family.
So Matthias hands himself in to the police, and he's also going to be part of this group of 6 that is going to stand trial. But while he's in prison, he has scheduled a series of videos of himself to go out on social media.
Because you're not allowed to tweet while you're in prison, so he's pre-scheduled.
And he's anticipated that he might not be a free man when this happens. So he starts this series of videos which have him staring down the barrel of a camera, looking like he's been taken hostage or like there's somebody pointing a gun to his head, but he's doing this all voluntarily. And this is all about proving to the world why Paul Pogba is a bad person. And he's got like hashtag Raffaella Pimenta, hashtag the truth, hashtag Matthias Pogba. So he just wants to go viral with these scandalous accusations which are about blackmail and witch doctors.
Undermining his brother in the court of public opinion.
Exactly.
And these accusations, I mean, the most famous and I think the funniest is that he says that Pogba hired a witch doctor to bewitch Kylian Mbappe before a PSG Manchester United Champions League game in 2019.
So the story is that Paul has hired a witch doctor to do black magic on his behalf. One of them is to curse Kylian before the game against Manchester United. Others are like writing letters which are then buried under the pitch at the Stade de France to help France win. They're all about elevating Paul, making sure that Manchester United do well and the French national team do well. But the funny thing about the narrator is he also believes that these curses are actually working. So that's why he thinks they're really bad, because he's cursing people and it's coming true. And I mentioned at the top that, Paul Pogba is a public Muslim, and he says that Paul Pogba is a traitor to his faith because he's engaging in black magic. This is not the sort of things that Muslims are supposed to do. And this is all part of the kind of case that he's launching about why his perfect brother is actually a terrible human being.
It seems that Pogba's go-to marabout was a Senegalese guy called Biram D. He's only identified by his initial, as per usual in French criminal trials. Biram D's nickname is Grand, and so police pull him over at one point. They arrest him at a traffic stop, Biram D, and they say, why do you have many thousands of euros on you? And Biram D says, well, I was given them by Paul Pogba. And the police said, what, you mean the world-famous footballer gave you loads of money? And Biram D says, yeah, it's true. And the police call Pogba and he says, yeah, I gave Biram D loads of money. Pogba had paid him up to 25 grand supposedly for doing charity work like financing wells for a school in Africa. So this marabout is quite successful. Pogba had given him money for charity, but Pogba in the end admits to police investigators that Biram D, the witch doctor, is a charlatan who only took money. Because I think Pogba also thinks they're real witch doctors, but I've wasted my money on a fake one.
Gosh, it won.
Well, Matthias Pogba believes in marabouts, and
Definitely.
he thinks, once I've said that Pogba tried to put a curse on Mbappe, my brother's career is going to be ruined, and he's probably going to go to jail. But this became a French legal issue, because is it illegal to hire a witch doctor to put a curse on someone in France? And it's not, because the French legal system is Cartesian. It's based on what the French call reason. And the French legal system does not believe in spells. So maraboutage doesn't exist legally. You can cast spells on whoever you want.
Damn right.
But it's not in the penal code. If Matthias thought that this revelation would land Paul in jail, he was incorrect, because casting spells is not illegal in France. But maybe they did hire a real marabout to cast a curse on Paul, because Paul's career now takes what seems at that point its final nosedive in a way that only a curse could explain. His body is going in 2 years at Juve, 2022 to 2023. He only plays a few games.
So he has this hero's return to Turin. Like, it's a massive media event. There's fans everywhere. The return of Pogba. Within a couple of weeks in pre-season, he screws up his knee. He refuses to get surgery because he's desperate to play in the 2022 World Cup, which ends up being an awful decision because he keeps playing with a busted knee, then has to have an operation, and he's crocked. So he's basically, his first season at Juve, he's probably out for the season, and he's definitely not going to make it to the World Cup.
He misses the World Cup.
And then it really goes downhill.
Yeah, in 2023, September 2023, Italy's national anti-doping body with the brilliant name NADO Italia bans him when he tests positive for taking dihydroepiandrosterone, which is a banned substance that can raise your testosterone. After a match, he's tested and he tests positive.
And you know what the funny thing is? He's not even playing. He's an unused substitute in a domestic game.
Poor guy.
With Juve, because he hasn't really been able to put on a shirt and play properly. So he gets randomly drug tested and they find this sort of testosterone booster in his blood.
And of course, the echoes are of Maradona. Listen to our Maradona doubleheader, where Maradona, at a very similar stage of his career, also 30 at that time, also his body failing, tests positive at Napoli and is banned. Pogba is given a 4-year ban from football for doping. At this point, he's 30 years old. It seems to be the end. And the Juve coach, Massimiliano Allegri, he says football is losing an extraordinary player who was different from all the others, which is true. He was. Pogba appeals, but it looks pretty hopeless. He writes on Instagram, "I am sad, shocked and heartbroken that everything I have built in my professional playing career has been taken from me." He says he didn't dope deliberately.
So the story is that when he's in rehab, of course, he's suffering from this injury. He goes to Miami, which is where his wife is from. You know, he's basically taking part in this intensive rehabilitation scheme, and he takes something and it's a supplement and he doesn't know, which is partly also a reflection of, I guess, his desperation to come back and play football, that he falls into this, you know, he takes something that a doctor that's not his team doctor gives him because he just wants to get better.
But then, October 2024, the good news comes. His ban is suddenly cut to 18 months. So he can train from January 2025 and can play again in March. Juve don't want him anymore, so it will be somewhere else, it appears, as we speak.
So after all the obituaries were written, perhaps now prematurely, Pogba has a chance at redemption. Will he have his final act?
Maybe we'll revisit this in a part 2 on Pogba next year, or when he wins the World Cup in 2026.
But for now, let's get to our sort of traditional end of an episode when we discuss the legacy. And I guess in this case, it's the legacy, but also where we think it went wrong for Pogba. We've got a series of factors. We've got the family structure, his overambition, maybe his complacency on the pitch, and then the doping. Out of the three, which one do we think is the most important factor of where it goes wrong?
The dysfunctional family.
And it's also worth talking about what it's like to be a footballer that comes from very modest backgrounds who makes it big. And then you have this entire patronage system that develops around you.
Yeah.
Which is about people that think they know you, your cousins, your second cousins, people that claim to be your friends at school, distant relatives, people back home in Guinea that need to build schools and charities. We've spoken about it a little bit in different episodes when we talk about sort of, I guess, the blandishments that Saudi offers to players and why some of them need that money to sustain this system of patronage.
Samuel Eto'o is funding hundreds and hundreds of people.
Charities are often just masks for other sorts of things. We mentioned in the Kante episode that he has probably been financially exploited. He was also threatened. His life was threatened because people want money out of them. And I think this is a part of, I guess, the footballer's story, from rags to riches, that we don't concentrate that much on because we don't know too much about it. But with Pogba, it's really come to the fore.
Yeah, it's a rare case of the footballer's family being turned inside out for everyone to see.
I really just feel for the guy because when I see him, and, of course, this is usually like on TV and the way that he expresses himself on social media. But he seems to be somebody that is like a bundle of light for people in his life.
A really fun guy.
If there is a redemption, I really, really hope to see it.
Yeah, I hope so as well. I felt very fond of him from my brief time with him, and then like you watching him, and I admire his brilliance, his genius, and he's had it so hard compared to other people we've done episodes on. I mean, if you think of the triad of most successful footballers of the new generation, it's Kylian Mbappe, Erling Haaland, and Jude Bellingham. And they all come from these hugely functional families, very sports aware, who made their careers possible every day. And Pogba comes from a very sporty family too. His dad thought he was going to be a pro. His two brothers were pros, but it's a dysfunctional family.
And it's a dangerous environment that he grows up in.
When I interviewed him in 2016, I said, why do the poor suburbs of Paris produce so many great players? Pogba, Mbappe, Kanté, Riyad Mahrez, William Saliba, who comes from Mbappe's suburb and was coached by Mbappe's dad, Matuidi, like you say. And Pogba said, because there is only football there. He said, frankly, the people in the neighbourhoods sometimes can do stupid things that take them down a bad path. But there is football to help us. And knowing what we know now about what happened to Pogba, what was done to him, those words about the bad path and doing stupid things, as he said, those words now have this chilling ring. And he was probably thinking about the people he knew already then. So he lived with that in his head throughout the best years of his career.
And now, even if you go even more retrospectively, maybe that's why he went to Manchester, to get away. That's why he went to Turin. He's never played for a club in France beyond Le Havre when he was, a teenager.
It's true. Yeah, I guess living in France is a very complicated thing for him. And then when you play for the national team and you go to Clairefontaine, this lovely chateau, and you get to hang out with only French people speaking French, it's like coming home, but in a secluded environment.
And a protected environment.
And then you go to Roissy-en-Brie, your old suburb, and you spend a few hours there, and it's lovely to see everyone, but it's also tinged with fear, menace, and jealousy and pity.
Yeah, it's a horrible way to live. I think, and we'll talk about this, what ends up with Pogba, I think he'll go to the US, which is as far as possible. He could be from France, where he might still be a slightly unknown person.
By the time this is broadcast, we may already know which club he goes to, and I can see the attraction of living in the US. But I also think Pogba thinks, I'm going to be the best.
Choose the hardest path.
Choose the hardest path, play in a top league in Europe, and beat everybody.
Oh God, he's too old to come to Chelsea, but I would love to see it, man.
Well, there's also the question of whether he still has a body that can play top-level football, because he didn't after 2022. It's a tragic waste of talent on the one hand, and then on the other hand, this guy was probably the best player and leader of the team that won a World Cup. So he has, however briefly, sat at the summit of football, and maybe he'll come back. All
right, so you've already hung out with him when he was 10 the age of 23. Simon, would you do it again?
It would be a great pleasure.
Obviously, I would love to hang out with him. I think I don't want to make this sound too much about me, but I feel like there's so many of his character traits that I recognise and I see in my friends. Just the complete hubris and gregarious nature of what he is.
That's
and the kind of
well,
overwhelming force of nature. No, these are the sorts of people that I'm attracted to, like in my friendship groups. So yeah, I would love to hang out with him.
What would he have been if he hadn't been a footballer? And this is the darkest question in his case, more so than for all the other people we've asked that question.
It's true, but you're going to give the dark answer. I'm not going to give the dark answer. I think he could have made it out. I'd see him in television. I could see him in music. I could see him in Hollywood, even probably post-football.
Maybe I could see him as a frustrated dreamer who becomes a criminal like the guys he grew up with. I didn't see that at all in the lovely man that I met, but looking at his entourage, who knows? Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms. Next week's episode is the first of a two-parter on Cristiano Ronaldo, the son of an alcoholic who will become football's greatest workaholic. Be sure to check it out. This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
and Simon Cooper.
And this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.